Welcome to the deep dive. If you are exhausted by the constant avalanche of hot takes and just the algorithmic feeds today, you are absolutely in the right place.
Yeah, the internet is definitely a lot right now.
It really is. And we designed this space for you to just cut through all that information overload. The goal here is to deliver pure, fascinating insights without the fluff. We want to focus not just on the what, but the why.
Exactly. We want to really get into the substance of things.
Right. And today's deep dive is incredibly special because the timing is, well, it's absolutely perfect. Today is Thursday, March 5th, 2026.
Which is a very significant date for our topic.
It is. Exactly 186 years ago, so on March 5th, 1840, this extraordinary woman was born. Her name was Constance Fenimore Woolson.
It's quite the milestone. And frankly, her story is one that mainstream literary history has, largely overlooked, which is a massive oversight.
It really is a huge blind spot.
Yeah.
So our mission today is to explore her life, her literature, and the lingering mysteries she left behind. We're going to uncover how a 19th century American writer captured the essence of a fractured nation.
And we'll get into how she forged a legendary connection with a literary giant.
Right, and how she met a tragically haunting end in Venice. And finally, why she is currently experiencing this massive modern renaissance. Okay, let's unpack this.
We need to establish right away that this isn't just a timeline of publication dates.
No, not at all.
We are looking at a profound human story here. It's a narrative of a life constantly in motion, driven by relentless travel. And it's punctuated by profound grief and defined by a uniquely sharp power of observation.
Yeah, observation was really her superpower.
It was. She used her writing to process the world. She basically left us a map of her own complex mind, and that map requires us to look at the darker corners of her early life.
It does. That map definitely starts with profound tragedy. She was actually born in Claremont, New Hampshire, but her family was forced to pack up and move to Cleveland, Ohio.
And the reason for that move is just heartbreaking.
It's unimaginable tragedy, really.
Yeah.
The deaths of 3 of her sisters from scarlet fever.
Yeah.
I mean, child mortality was an incredibly grim reality of the mid-19th century, obviously.
Mm-hmm.
But losing 3 siblings at once, that casts a very specific, very heavy shadow over a childhood home.
You really have to imagine the psychological weight of that on a young girl.
Right. She was essentially growing up in a space defined by absence, which, might explain her lifelong obsession with documenting people and places before they vanished.
That underlying grief is absolutely foundational to her worldview, but we also have to look at the immense pressure of her lineage. Her middle name, Fenimore, is no accident.
Oh, right. The Cooper connection.
Exactly. She was the grandniece of James Fenimore Cooper, who was, for all intents and purposes, American literary royalty.
He essentially invented the American frontier novel.
He did. So she is carrying this monumental legacy of American letters in her blood. And she's doing this while growing up in the shadow of profound familial loss.
And she wasn't just resting on her family laurels either. Her early life was defined by an incredibly rigorous education for a woman of her era.
She attended the Cleveland Female Seminary.
Right, and later a boarding school in New York. But what I find fascinating is that her real education happened completely outside the classroom.
Through her travels, right?
Yes. She traveled extensively through the Midwest and the northeastern regions of the United States during her young adulthood. She was actively gathering material.
Soaking it all in.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
Serving the rugged landscapes and the people who inhabited them long before she officially picked up a pen to write for the public.
But the catalyst that finally pushed her to become a professional writer was, tragically, another loss.
Her father.
Yes. Her father died in 1869. And the very next year, in 1870, she began publishing fiction and essays in major, prestigious magazines of the era.
Magazines like the Atlantic Monthly and Harper's Magazine.
Exactly.
Yeah, wait, the timeline there is astounding to me. Her father dies in 1869, and by 1870, she is appearing in the Atlantic.
It's incredibly fast.
How does an unknown writer just bypass the usual years of rejection letters and step right into the most elite literary circles of the day?
Well, part of it was undoubtedly the Fenimore Cooper connection, which obviously opened doors.
Sure, name recognition helps.
But you don't stay in the Atlantic purely on your uncle's name. She possessed a fully formed, incredibly sophisticated voice right out of the gate.
It's like she'd been practicing her whole life.
It really was as if the loss of her father unlocked an urgent need to create and, practically speaking, to support herself financially.
And her early publication strategy was fascinating, too. Her very first full-length publication was actually a children's book. It was called The Old Stone House, published in 1873.
But she didn't use her real name for that one.
No, she published it under the pseudonym Anne March. It's such a classic 19th century maneuver.
Yeah.
Women often had to hide in plain sight to test the waters of the publishing industry without risking their social reputation.
She didn't hide for long.
Not at all. By 1875, she published her first volume of adult short stories under her own name. It was titled Castle Nowhere, Lake Country Sketches. And this collection drew heavily on her time in the Great Lakes region, especially Mackinac Island.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, what Woolson is doing here is highly innovative.
How so?
She isn't writing generic parlor room romances or drawing room dramas, which unfortunately was the expected domain for female writers at the time.
Right, she's out in the wild.
Exactly. She is taking intense regional geography and turning it into serious literature. She is mapping the American Midwest, claiming this rugged, icy lake country landscape as a valid and vital setting for high art.
And very few writers of any gender were doing that for the Great Lakes region in the 1870s.
Almost none.
That brings up an interesting pivot. She has found her voice in the rugged North. But the 1870s was an incredibly volatile time in America. Her father's death triggered her career, but it was her mother's declining health that physically moved her to the next phase of her life.
The Southern years.
Yeah. From 1873 to 1879, Woolson began spending her winters with her mother in St. Augustine, Florida, and she used St. Augustine as a base to travel widely throughout the American South.
This is a crucial era. We really have to remember the historical context here. She is a northern woman raised in Ohio, stepping directly into the post-Civil War Reconstruction era South.
The country is completely fractured at this point.
Deeply fractured. The trauma of the war is still an open wound. The social and economic orders are completely upended, and the landscapes themselves bear the physical scars of battle.
And Woolson brings that same razor-sharp observational skill from the Great Lakes into this highly sensitive, deeply uncomfortable environment.
The creative output from this period is staggering.
It really is. Specifically, her 1880 short story collection, Rodman the Keeper, Southern Sketches, and her 1883 novella For the Major.
Rodman the Keeper is just brilliant.
It's a brilliant conceptual hook. The title story is about a Northern Union soldier who is working in the South as the keeper of a national cemetery for fallen Union troops. And he's completely surrounded by a hostile local population.
She is directly confronting the tension of occupation right there.
And the lingering bitterness of the war. She wasn't an armchair tourist.
No, she was immersing herself in the complicated reality of a recovering nation. It required an immense amount of empathy and a willingness to look closely at truths that most people, especially Northerners, preferred to ignore.
You really see that geographical and emotional immersion in her poetry from this time, too. Her poems read like a map of her relentless curiosity.
They really do.
She writes Kentucky Belle, which is explicitly subtitled as being told in an Ohio farmhouse in 1868. Then she drops us into the Deep South with a Smitty, set in Pickens County, South Carolina in 1874.
And she captures her winter base with the Florida beach.
Think about that for a second. Stepping into the backroads of South Carolina during Reconstruction as a Northern woman, that required an incredible amount of social bravery. She was actively crossing the deepest divides of her era.
But as much as she became the definitive chronicler of the fractured American landscape, she wouldn't stay in America. The next phase of her life expands her canvas entirely.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Because in 1879, her mother passes away.
Right.
With both of her parents gone, Woolson makes a massive, life-altering decision. She leaves America completely.
She crosses the Atlantic and begins living as an expatriate in Europe.
But she doesn't just buy a quiet country estate and settle down, does she?
Not at all. She lives out of a succession of grand hotels across England, France, Italy, Switzerland, Germany, Egypt, and Greece.
It is an endless, restless tour. She essentially becomes a permanent wanderer.
And this European era is when she transitions from being a celebrated writer of short regional sketches to an absolute powerhouse novelist. The scale of her ambition grows to match the scale of her travels.
She produces these massive, sweeping novels.
Anne in 1880, East Angels in 1886.
Jupiter Lights in 1889, and Horace Chase in 1894.
And alongside these, she publishes rich travel sketches, like Mentone, Cairo, and Corfu, which were born from her travels to Egypt and Greece.
The sheer productivity of writing 4 massive novels while living out of suitcases is mind-boggling to me.
It takes incredible discipline.
But the European chapter of her life is dominated by a completely different kind of story. We have to talk about the legend, the mystery, and the intensely debated relationship she developed during these years.
Yes.
I'm talking about her friendship with the iconic American author Henry James.
This is arguably one of the most scrutinized literary friendships of the 19th century. They were two brilliant American expatriates observing Europe, but more importantly, observing each other.
Biographers have spent over a century trying to parse exactly what this dynamic was.
Was it a meeting of intellectual equals? Was it an unrequited romance? Was it a fierce, quiet rivalry?
And this is where her fiction bleeds into reality in a way that is almost spooky. She wrote what is now considered her absolute masterpiece of a short story, titled Miss Grief.
The plot of this story is just devastating.
It really is. It features a masterful, highly polished, successful male author living in Rome. He is visited by a rough, somewhat erratic, but undeniably brilliant female writer named Rona McCarthy.
Who goes by the nickname Grief.
Right. And she wants his validation. He recognizes her genius, but he tries to edit her work to make it more acceptable to polite society.
But she refuses to compromise her raw power.
Exactly. Ultimately, she dies in poverty, and the male author keeps her unpublished manuscript locked in a drawer for the rest of his life. It's like a secret monument to her superior talent.
What's fascinating here is she wrote Miss Grief before she had ever actually met Henry James.
That detail is wild. She essentially wrote the psychological script for their dynamic before the curtain ever went up.
It speaks to her profound understanding of the literary world and the inherent gender dynamics of the 19th century publishing industry. She understood exactly how the establishment, represented by the polished male author, would react to a raw, uncompromising female genius.
She was perhaps warning herself about the kind of artistic soulmate she was seeking.
That dynamic is so enduring that modern authors simply cannot let it go. Woolson has actually become a character in modern literature.
We see an entire subgenre of contemporary novels dedicated to fictionalizing her relationship with Henry James.
Emma Tennant wrote Felony in 2002.
David Lodge, published author in 2004. Colm Toibin wrote the incredibly acclaimed novel The Master that same year, and Elizabeth McGuire published The Open Door in 2008.
The reason modern novelists are so obsessed with her is that she represents a very specific, tragic archetype. She has become the ultimate symbol of the overlooked female genius standing in the shadow of a male giant.
Modern writers are using her life to explore how literary history erases women.
And they're trying to solve the puzzle of what really happened in those European hotels between her and James.
But as with the beginning of her life, the end of her story in Europe is marked by a profound, inescapable darkness. We need to slow down the pace here, because the end of her life is harrowing.
It is incredibly difficult to talk about.
In 1893, Woolson had moved to Venice. She rented an elegant apartment in the Palazzo Orio Semitico Lobenzon, right on the Grand Canal.
On paper, it sounds like the absolute pinnacle of the romantic expatriate dream.
But the reality inside that apartment was a nightmare.
She was suffering terribly. She had contracted a brutal strain of influenza. Now, we often think of the flu today as a bad week in bed, but in the late 19th century, influenza was a debilitating illness that frequently carried severe neurological and psychological side effects.
It caused extreme nervous exhaustion.
Combined with the sheer physical toll of the illness, she was battling a severe, overwhelming depression.
The neurological impact of historical influenza is something we often gloss over, but it completely unravels the mind. In January of 1894, the darkness simply overtook her. She either jumped or fell to her death from the fourth-story window of her Venetian apartment onto the street below.
It is a horrific, violent end to a life spent meticulously observing the beauty and tragedy of the world. And there is a historical detail regarding her death that is particularly haunting. The fall did not kill her instantly.
No.
She actually survived for roughly an hour on the pavement after the impact.
An hour alone on the cold Venetian stones. It is deeply tragic. But her memory was preserved in several beautiful, far-flung locations that perfectly reflect the vast geography of her life.
Her body is buried in the famous Protestant cemetery in Rome.
But she's also memorialized back where her literary journey began. There's a bronze memorial known as Anne's Tablet nestled in the woods on Mackinac Island, Michigan.
And tying it back to her famous lineage, she's remembered in Christchurch in Cooperstown, New York.
Right. There is a special niche containing a slender silver trumpet vase dedicated to her memory.
Those memorials span the globe, from the icy Great Lakes to the Italian peninsula. It is a fitting tribute to a woman who refused to be confined to one place, a woman who spent her life capturing the spirit of entirely different worlds.
So what does this all mean? Why are we taking a deep dive into the life of a 19th century novelist today? What makes Constance Fenimore Woolson's legacy so relevant right now?
Her relevance today lies in how dramatically our understanding of her has evolved. It is a masterclass in how history judges, and often misjudges, women.
For decades, literary critics boxed her in. They labeled her a pioneer of local color or regionalism.
Now, those terms sound polite, but historically they were used dismissively. Calling a woman a local color writer was a way of saying her work was quaint, folksy, and lacked the universal philosophical themes found in the work of male writers like Henry James.
But modern scholarship has completely blown up that condescending framework. She's no longer just a regional curiosity. Scholars are actively applying complex, modern analytical lenses to her work.
We are seeing incredibly deep analyses using feminist theory, psychoanalytic readings, and gender studies.
And particularly post-colonial theory and new historicism.
If we take post-colonial theory, for example, scholars aren't just reading Rodman the Keeper as a nice story about a southern graveyard. They're reading it as an examination of imperial occupation.
They're looking at how Woolson wrote about the power dynamics between the victorious wealthy North, effectively occupying the defeated, economically ruined South.
They're analyzing her work through new historicism to see how she subtly embedded the economic and social anxieties of the 1870s into the background of her fiction. She wasn't just describing the scenery, she was critiquing the entire American project.
The momentum behind this modern renaissance is undeniable. For a long time, her legacy was kept on life support by her own family. Her niece, Claire Benedict, did the heavy lifting in the 1930s.
Preserving her aunt's letters and writings in biographical volumes titled 5 Generations.
But the academic world has finally caught up. In 2012, Sharon L. Dean published the complete letters of Constance Fenimore Woolson, which finally gave scholars unfiltered access to her private voice.
Then, in 2016, Anne Boyd Ryu published a major definitive biography called Portrait of a Lady Novelist.
There is now an active Constance Fenimore Woolson Society holding regular conferences to dissect her work, and her themes are crossing international borders again.
In 2019, a bilingual edition of Miss Grief was published in English and German.
Under the title Fräulein Kummer.
It proves that her exploration of artistic struggle, female ambition, and complex psychological relationships still resonates deeply with international audiences today.
To summarize this extraordinary life, Constance Fenimore Woolson was a woman who simply refused to stay still. She was constantly moving, using relentless travel and an impossibly acute power of observation to write her way through immense personal grief.
She bypassed the expectations of her era to map the diverse, complicated landscapes of a changing world.
From the icy waters of the Great Lakes to the humid, war-torn roads of the Reconstruction South, all the way to the grand hotels of Europe and the tragic waters of the Grand Canal.
As we close out this exploration, I want to leave you with an important question to mull over. Think back to that masterpiece short story, Miss Grief. She wrote a psychologically devastating narrative about a female writer's complex, destructive dynamic with a great established male author before she ever actually met Henry James.
The ultimate preemptive strike.
We have to wonder, did her unparalleled observational skills allow her to accurately predict the exact nature of the relationship they would eventually have? Or, and this is the truly provocative angle, did her story subconsciously serve as a psychological script?
That is fascinating.
Once their paths finally crossed in Europe, did they both inevitably, perhaps unknowingly, step into the role she had already written for them? Did life imitate art, or did the artist just see human nature that clearly?
A woman who wrote her own destiny before it even happened. That is a brilliant thought to leave on. Thank you so much for taking this deep dive with us today. We hope this look into the life, the tragic end, and the glorious modern renaissance of Constance Fenimore Woolson has given you something truly worthwhile to think about. Until next time, keep questioning, keep reading, and keep exploring.